Chosen one, there is a truth about human nature that many people only discover after years of confusion, and it often arrives through experiences that feel deeply unfair. You try to move through life with integrity, treating people with kindness, respecting boundaries, and refusing to harm others, even when you have the opportunity. You avoid manipulation. You do not participate in gossip, and you try to remain consistent in the way you treat those around you. Yet despite those intentions, you begin noticing something strange happening. The very qualities that should make relationships easier sometimes attract tension instead of appreciation. Instead of receiving simple respect, you may encounter subtle hostility, quiet resentment, or criticism that seems disconnected from anything you actually did. At first, this experience can be confusing because it contradicts the idea many people grow up believing, that being a good person naturally protects you from being disliked. But reality often reveals something different. Sometimes the kindest person in the room becomes the most resented one, not because they caused harm, but because their presence highlights something others are trying to ignore within themselves. In this context, being good does not mean being perfect or naive. It means carrying certain qualities that remain steady even when circumstances change. Integrity means you say what you mean, and your actions match your words. Consistency means people can trust the pattern of your behavior rather than guessing your intentions. Empathy means you care about the impact your actions have on others, but you still maintain boundaries so that kindness does not turn into self-sacrifice. These qualities create a form of stability that many people admire, but they can also create discomfort for individuals who have not done the internal work required to develop the same character. This is where envy often begins forming. Envy rarely targets chaos or noise. It tends to focus on light. When someone embodies qualities that others secretly wish they possessed, those qualities become difficult to ignore. The presence of integrity highlights manipulation. The presence of discipline highlights procrastination. The presence of calmness highlights emotional instability. In environments where many people rely on shortcuts, image management, or external validation, someone who moves quietly with authenticity can unintentionally disrupt the balance of the room. The disruption does not come from aggression or superiority. It comes from contrast. When your behavior reflects a certain level of self-respect or emotional maturity, that reflection becomes a mirror, and mirrors can make people uncomfortable when they reveal parts of reality that someone would rather avoid confronting. This is why jealousy often hides behind other explanations. Instead of openly admitting envy, people may criticize your personality, question your motives, or reinterpret your behavior through negative assumptions. They might describe your discipline as arrogance, your boundaries as selfishness, or your calmness as emotional distance. These labels allow them to reduce the impact of what they see. By reframing your qualities as flaws, they protect themselves from the uncomfortable comparison that triggered the reaction in the first place. Of course, it is important to remain grounded in self-awareness. Being disliked does not automatically mean you are correct in every situation. Everyone has blind spots, and growth requires the humility to examine criticism honestly. But when you consistently encounter hostility that appears without clear cause, jealousy is often one of the underlying forces at work. The pattern becomes recognizable over time. The tension appears strongest when you experience progress, peace, or recognition. The criticism increases when your life begins reflecting the values you committed to maintaining. Instead of acknowledging those achievements openly, some individuals respond by attempting to reduce their significance. Understanding this dynamic changes how you interpret the hostility you may encounter. It allows you to see that resentment sometimes reveals more about the internal struggles of others than about your own character. The goal of recognizing this truth is not to develop cynicism or distrust toward everyone around you. Rather, it is to gain clarity about the emotional currents that shape human relationships. When you understand that goodness can create contrast in environments where integrity is rare, you stop expecting universal approval for doing the right thing. Instead, you begin focusing on maintaining your character regardless of how others respond to it. This awareness prepares you to see envy more clearly when it appears, and it allows you to continue moving with integrity without shrinking your light simply to make others more comfortable. Chosen one. Once you understand that good people are sometimes resented rather than appreciated, the next step is understanding why envy often aims at those who are trying to live with integrity. The answer begins with something simple but powerful. Your presence becomes a mirror. Human beings constantly evaluate themselves, even when they pretend not to. Much of that evaluation happens unconsciously through comparison with the people around them. When someone enters a room carrying discipline, honesty, and emotional steadiness, those qualities naturally reflect the opposite behaviors that may already exist in the environment. Your consistency reflects the moments when someone else chose shortcuts. Your honesty highlights the situations where another person relied on manipulation or half-truths. Your discipline quietly exposes excuses that have been repeated for years. The mirror itself does not attack anyone. It simply shows what is already there. But when people are not ready to confront what the mirror reveals, they sometimes direct their frustration toward the person holding it. This is why reactions to integrity can become surprisingly hostile in certain environments. The discomfort is not caused by your behavior alone. It is caused by what your behavior reveals. When someone observes a person living according to principles they themselves struggle to maintain, the contrast becomes difficult to ignore. Instead of acknowledging that contrast as inspiration, some individuals try to reduce its impact by criticizing the person who reflects it. The mirror becomes the target because confronting the reflection would require personal change. Contrast plays another powerful role in how envy develops. Every social environment develops a certain rhythm over time. In some spaces, the rhythm includes gossip, shortcuts, quiet competition, or emotional drama. When everyone participates in those patterns, the behavior feels normal. No one stands out because everyone is moving in the same direction. But when someone begins operating differently, the contrast immediately becomes visible. A person who refuses to gossip in a room where gossip is common can unintentionally make others feel judged, even without saying a word. A person who chooses integrity in a system that rewards shortcuts may be perceived as self-righteous, even when they are simply following their values. The difference in behavior disrupts the comfort of the existing culture. Suddenly, people become aware that another way of living is possible, and that awareness creates tension. Instead of acknowledging the contrast as a healthy example, some individuals respond by labeling the person who introduced it. They might describe your behavior as excessive, unrealistic, or performative. Words like fake, too intense, or trying too hard become tools used to shrink the contrast back to something manageable. By attaching negative interpretations to your actions, they reduce the pressure to reflect on their own choices. In this way, labeling becomes a psychological defense against the discomfort created by contrast. Another reason envy targets good people is that peace threatens control. Many insecure individuals manage their relationships through emotional turbulence. Drama, confusion, and unpredictability give them influence because they create situations where others feel compelled to respond. When a person enters that environment with calm boundaries and emotional stability, the usual methods of control stop working. Someone who remains grounded cannot easily be steered by guilt, pressure, or manipulation. Their calm presence changes the rhythm of the interaction. Instead of reacting to every provocation, they respond thoughtfully, or not at all. For individuals who rely on emotional reactions to maintain influence, this stability can feel threatening. If they cannot control your behavior directly, they may attempt to control how others perceive you. The focus shifts from influencing your actions to shaping the narrative around your character. Rumors, subtle criticism, or questions about your motives become tools for managing the story. In this way, the energy of envy often moves toward reputation rather than confrontation. The goal becomes redefining your image so that the contrast you created no longer carries the same weight. When the narrative changes, the mirror becomes less threatening because its reflection has been reframed. Understanding these dynamics reveals why envy often remains hidden rather than openly acknowledged. Few people will openly admit that they resent someone for being disciplined, honest, or emotionally balanced. Instead, the reaction appears through subtle shifts in language and behavior. Compliments become mixed with reduction. Support becomes selective. Praise appears when your progress is distant, but disappears when it becomes undeniable.
These patterns are rarely random. They reflect the internal conflict between admiration and insecurity that envy creates. On one hand, people recognize the value of the qualities you represent. On the other hand, those same qualities highlight areas where they feel unfinished or uncertain. Rather than resolving that tension through growth, some individuals attempt to resolve it by reducing the person who triggered it. Once you understand the mirror effect and the power of contrast, the reactions around you begin making more sense. The envy you encounter is often less about who you are personally and more about what your presence represents. Your integrity reminds people of possibilities they have not yet chosen to pursue, and for those who are not ready to face that reflection, the easiest response is to challenge the mirror instead of confronting what it shows. Chosen one. Envy rarely introduces itself openly. Very few people will ever say directly that they resent your growth, your discipline, or the peace you carry in your life. Instead, jealousy tends to disguise itself through behavior. It hides inside comments that sound harmless at first, reactions that feel slightly off, and patterns that only become clear after you observe them over time. One of the most recognizable signs is the backhanded compliment. These remarks appear supportive on the surface, but quietly reduce the value of what you accomplished. Someone might acknowledge your success while immediately suggesting that luck played the biggest role. They may say something that sounds like praise, but carries an undertone, implying that the outcome was easier than it looked. In these moments, the compliment functions less as celebration and more as a way to shrink the significance of your progress. The person speaking may not even realize they are doing it consciously. Their mind simply tries to restore emotional balance by minimizing the gap they perceive between your effort and their own. Another common sign appears through selective support. Genuine encouragement tends to remain consistent, regardless of the situation. People who truly celebrate your growth are present during both your quiet effort and your visible success. Envy, however, behaves differently. Someone may remain silent when you achieve something meaningful, but become unusually vocal when you struggle. The energy they bring into conversations changes depending on whether the moment highlights your strength or your vulnerability. When you experience setbacks, they appear curious, engaged, even supportive. But when you move forward, they become distant or indifferent. Over time, this pattern becomes difficult to ignore because encouragement should not fluctuate according to whether you are rising or falling. Another behavior that often reveals envy is the tendency to minimize the work behind your achievements. Instead of acknowledging the discipline, patience, or sacrifice required to reach a certain point, someone focuses only on the visible outcome. They describe the result as simple or inevitable, while ignoring the process that made it possible. This reduction allows them to reinterpret your progress as something that required little effort or special focus. By framing the achievement this way, they protect themselves from confronting the reality that your results came from choices they might not have been willing to make. The conversation shifts away from the dedication behind the outcome and toward the idea that anyone could have done the same thing under the right circumstances. Closely related to this pattern is competition disguised as friendship. Some individuals maintain relationships while quietly measuring every milestone against their own progress. Conversations begin to include subtle comparisons. Every story about your experience becomes an opportunity for them to introduce an example where they appear slightly ahead. Instead of shared excitement, the interaction carries a sense of quiet rivalry. The dynamic may remain polite on the surface, but the energy beneath it feels tense rather than supportive. Envy also reveals itself through information harvesting. A person who feels competitive may begin asking questions that appear curious, but focus heavily on the details of your progress. They want to know how much you earn, what strategies you are using, who you are working with, or what your next plans involve. At first, these questions can seem like normal conversation, but when they appear repeatedly and always revolve around measuring your position, the intention becomes clearer. The information collected allows them to compare their situation with yours more precisely. It may also provide material they can later reinterpret in conversations with others. This leads to another common sign of hidden jealousy: smear campaigns disguised as concern. Instead of criticizing you openly, someone may frame their comments as worry or advice when speaking to mutual acquaintances. They may say they are concerned about the direction you are taking, or question whether your intentions are entirely genuine. These statements sound reasonable on the surface, which allows them to circulate without appearing openly hostile. Yet the effect is the same as direct criticism. The narrative surrounding your character slowly shifts through conversations you may never even hear about. One of the most subtle yet revealing signs appears when you share good news, and the emotional reaction you receive does not match the words being spoken. Someone might congratulate you verbally, while their tone or expression suggests discomfort. Their smile feels forced, or their enthusiasm seems rehearsed. This moment often passes quickly, but it leaves a small impression that something about the interaction feels slightly misaligned. The tension between what is said and what is felt becomes noticeable when it repeats across multiple situations. Genuine support usually carries warmth and ease. The energy feels relaxed because the other person is comfortable with your success. Envy, on the other hand, carries a tightness that is difficult to disguise completely. The person may say the correct words, but the emotional atmosphere remains strained. Learning to recognize these patterns helps you understand the difference between healthy relationships and ones shaped by quiet comparison. Real support tends to feel open and encouraging, while envy often introduces subtle tension into interactions that should feel simple and celebratory. When you become aware of these signs, you gain the ability to navigate relationships with greater clarity, without allowing hidden jealousy to pull you into confusion about your own growth. Chosen one. Once you begin recognizing the signs of envy around you, the next challenge is deciding how to respond without allowing that negativity to change your character. The greatest trap jealousy creates is the temptation to become bitter. When someone repeatedly minimizes your work, questions your intentions, or spreads quiet criticism behind your back, the natural reaction is to defend yourself or to mirror their hostility. But reacting in anger often feeds the very narrative they are trying to build about you. Envy thrives on emotional reactions because those reactions give critics something to point at. If they can provoke you into frustration or conflict, they gain a justification for the story they were already trying to tell. This is why the first response of a chosen one must always be to remain clean in character. Staying clean does not mean pretending nothing is happening or tolerating disrespect indefinitely. It means refusing to become the version of yourself that envy is trying to create. Your integrity remains intact, even when others are trying to distort your image. By maintaining calm behavior and consistent actions, you remove the evidence jealousy often tries to manufacture. Over time, People who observe your consistency begin noticing the difference between accusation and reality. Your restraint becomes a form of quiet strength because it demonstrates that your character does not shift according to someone else's bitterness. The second response involves reducing access. One of the most common mistakes people make when dealing with envy is continuing to share personal plans, goals, and progress with individuals who have already demonstrated competitive energy. Openness is valuable in healthy relationships, but not every environment deserves unlimited access to your life. When someone repeatedly turns your growth into comparison or criticism, the most effective adjustment is often to limit how much information they receive. You can remain polite and respectful without revealing every detail of your journey. Sharing less about upcoming plans, financial progress, or personal milestones removes the material envy often feeds on. Privacy becomes a form of protection because it prevents your ideas from becoming subjects of speculation or rivalry. This approach does not require confrontation or dramatic boundaries. It simply means that your conversations become lighter and less detailed when interacting with people who have shown competitive tendencies. Your focus shifts toward execution rather than explanation. By the time results appear, the work is already complete, leaving little room for others to interfere with the process. Another important response is allowing patterns to speak instead of trying to win public arguments. When jealousy leads someone to criticize or misrepresent you, the instinct to correct every statement can feel overwhelming. You may want to defend your reputation or expose the inaccuracies in what was said. But constant defense often traps you in the same cycle that envy created. The conversation becomes about accusations rather than your actual work. Instead of engaging in indirect responses through social media or public debates, a more effective approach is to remain focused on your actions. Over time, consistency reveals the truth more clearly than arguments ever could. If the situation involves professional environments where reputation matters, documenting facts and maintaining professionalism provides protection without unnecessary confrontation. Evidence and calm communication carry more weight than emotional reactions. In personal environments, distance often speaks louder than explanation. People eventually recognize the difference between patterns of integrity and patterns of criticism. The final response involves upgrading your environment. Not every space supports growth in the same way. Some cultures quietly reward comparison and rivalry, while others encourage collaboration and mutual support. Remaining in environments where jealousy is normalized can slowly drain your motivation and emotional energy. When envy becomes a dominant feature of a room, the healthiest decision is often to move toward spaces where people are building rather than competing. These environments usually contain individuals who understand that another person's success does not reduce their own potential. Instead of measuring themselves against others, they focus on improving their own craft while celebrating progress wherever it appears. Surrounding yourself with people who possess humility and emotional maturity changes the atmosphere of your life. Conversations shift from comparison to collaboration. Ideas are shared without fear of rivalry. Progress becomes something that lifts everyone rather than threatening anyone. Through these responses, remaining clean in character, reducing unnecessary access, allowing patterns to reveal the truth, and choosing healthier environments, you create a path forward that protects both your peace and your purpose. Envy may still appear occasionally, but it no longer determines your direction. Instead of shrinking your light to make others comfortable, you refine the spaces where your light is allowed to exist without hostility. And in doing so, you continue moving forward with the same integrity that triggered the envy in the first place, proving through action that bitterness never had the power to change who you are. Chosen one. After you have seen how envy forms, how it disguises itself, and how it tries to distort your character, a deeper understanding begins to settle inside you. The truth is simple, but often difficult to accept at first. Your light is not the problem.
The discomfort you sometimes trigger in others does not come from wrongdoing on your part, but from something unresolved within them. Jealousy is rarely about the person being targeted. It is usually about the distance someone feels between who they are and who they wish they could be. When another person embodies qualities they admire but have not yet developed, discipline, integrity, peace, or purpose, that distance becomes visible. In psychological terms, envy is often a form of grief. It is the quiet mourning of the version of themselves they believe they could have been if different choices had been made. Instead of processing that grief honestly, some individuals attempt to reduce the person who triggered it. By criticizing your character or questioning your intentions, they temporarily avoid confronting the deeper realization that change requires effort and responsibility. Understanding this truth changes the way you interpret hostility directed at you.
What once felt like personal rejection begins to look more like a reflection of internal struggle happening inside someone else. Their reaction reveals the conflict between admiration and insecurity that envy creates. When you reach this level of understanding, something important happens inside you. The urge to defend yourself against every accusation begins to fade. You realize that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected, because the hostility you encountered was never about facts in the first place. It was about contrast. Your life represented a possibility that someone else had not yet embraced. That possibility carried both inspiration and discomfort, and some people chose discomfort over growth. Recognizing this allows you to continue moving forward without shrinking yourself to make others feel safe. For many chosen ones, there is a temptation to dim their light in environments where jealousy appears frequently. They may speak less about their goals, hold back their ideas, or soften their achievements in order to avoid triggering tension. While humility is valuable, constantly reducing yourself to accommodate insecurity can quietly erode your purpose. Your path was never meant to be shaped by the emotional reactions of people who are not ready to confront their own potential. The presence of envy often signals that you are moving in the direction you are meant to pursue. Your progress highlights what is possible when discipline and integrity align with purpose. There is also a spiritual dimension to this experience that becomes clearer over time. Many people discover that environments filled with envy gradually fall away as their path becomes more defined. Relationships change, social circles shift, and opportunities appear in places where collaboration replaces competition. What once felt like rejection often reveals itself as protection. Not every person is meant to walk beside you in every season of your life.
Some connections exist only long enough to reveal lessons about boundaries, discernment, and the importance of protecting your energy. When jealousy becomes the dominant energy in a space, separation sometimes becomes necessary for growth to continue. This separation is not punishment or judgment, it is simply alignment. Light naturally moves toward environments where it can exist without constant resistance. As this realization deepens, your focus begins returning to what truly matters. Instead of analyzing every reaction or rumor surrounding your life, you concentrate on maintaining the character that brought you this far. Integrity remains your foundation. Discipline remains your method. Peace remains your compass. The presence of envy does not change these principles. It only confirms that the path you are walking stands out in environments where authenticity is rare. Over time, the people who are meant to understand your journey will see the consistency behind your actions. They will recognize the difference between someone who builds quietly and someone who criticizes loudly. Truth reveals itself through repetition. The same character that triggered envy in some will inspire respect in others. In the end, the lesson envy teaches is not about learning how to avoid being disliked. It is about learning how to remain aligned with who you are, regardless of how others respond to your growth. When you stop shrinking to protect insecurity, your life becomes clearer and more focused. You no longer measure your progress by approval or criticism. Instead, you measure it by alignment with your values and purpose. And as you continue walking that path with quiet confidence, the light you carry becomes something stronger than envy could ever diminish. If this message resonated with you, remember this. The presence of envy does not mean you should dim your light. Often, it simply means your growth has become visible. Stay focused on your character, your discipline, and the path you were called to walk. When you remain aligned, time will reveal the difference between those who build and those who only criticize. If this message helped you see things more clearly, support the channel so more people can hear it. Like the video, share it with someone who has been misunderstood for doing the right thing, and subscribe for more insights on discernment, boundaries, and personal elevation. And if you choose integrity without becoming bitter, comment, "Stay clean."